3 creepy true night shift horror stories. Have you ever worked the night shift? When the world sleeps and darkness swallows everything whole, leaving you alone with nothing but flickering fluorescent lights and the echo of your own footsteps. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories from people who learned the hard way that some things only come out after midnight. These aren't your typical workplace horror stories. These are encounters that changed lives, shattered nerves, and left permanent scars on those brave, or unfortunate, enough to be awake when the rest of the world dreams. Before we begin, if you enjoy true horror stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming to this channel. And if you've ever had your own terrifying night shift experience, share it in the comments below. I read every single one. Now turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't watch this alone. Let's begin. Story 1. The Convenience Store. My name is Marcus, and I used to work the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store just off Highway 50 in Nevada. It was one of those small, independently owned places that somehow survived despite being 30 miles from the nearest town. The pay was decent, and honestly, I liked working alone. No annoying co-workers, no demanding customers during rush hour. Just me, some podcasts, and the occasional trucker stopping for coffee and cigarettes. I'd been working there for about 6 months when things started getting weird. It began small, items moved from where I'd placed them, products knocked off shelves in aisles I hadn't been down, that sort of thing. I figured I was just tired, you know? Night shifts mess with your head. Your mind plays tricks when you've been awake for 20 hours straight and you're existing on nothing but energy drinks and gas station hot dogs. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday around 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone, debating whether to heat up some taquitos for a snack. The store was dead quiet. No cars had passed on the highway for over an hour. That's when I heard it, a tapping sound coming from the back of the store. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone knocking on glass. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the counter and slowly made my way toward the sound. The store had these long aisles with overhead lights that buzzed constantly, casting everything in this harsh yellowish glow. As I walked, my shadow stretched out in front of me, thin and distorted. The tapping was coming from the walk-in cooler. Now this cooler was old, the kind with a heavy metal door and a handle you had to really pull to open. But the door was slightly ajar, which was impossible because it automatically locked from the outside when closed. I always had to use my key to get back in if I went in there. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at that door, listening to the tapping continue from inside. Tap, tap, tap. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. You know that feeling when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to run? That's what I felt. But I was the only one there and I had to check. Maybe someone had gotten locked in somehow, even though I hadn't seen anyone enter the store for hours. I gripped the bat tighter and pulled the door open. The cold air hit me immediately, along with the smell of old produce and refrigerated drinks. I stepped inside and that's when I saw her. There was a woman standing in the back corner of the cooler, facing the wall. She was wearing what looked like a hospital gown, thin and faded, completely inappropriate for the freezing temperature. Her hair was long, dark, and wet, hanging down her back like seaweed. She wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking. "You can't be in here. The store isn't." She turned around. "I'm going to tell you what I saw, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not crazy. I don't do drugs. I wasn't drunk. What I saw was real, and it's burned into my brain so deeply that I still see it every time I close my eyes." The woman had no face. Not like it was covered or hidden, it was just smooth skin where her features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank, pale flesh stretched over a skull. But somehow, impossibly, I knew she was looking at me. I could feel her gaze even though she had no eyes to see with. I stumbled backward, dropping the bat. It clattered on the concrete floor with a sound that echoed through the cooler. The woman began walking toward me, not fast, but with a purpose. Her movements were wrong, jerky, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite know how humans moved. I ran. I burst out of that cooler, slammed the door behind me, and sprinted to the front of the store. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out to call 911. But before I could dial, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was coming from the front windows. I looked up and she was standing outside, pressed against the glass. That faceless head tilted to one side like she was curious, studying me. Then she raised one hand and placed it flat against the window, her palm leaving a wet print on the glass. The 911 operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. All I could do was stare at this thing outside my store, this woman who couldn't possibly be real but absolutely was. Hello? Is anyone there? The woman outside suddenly moved with incredible speed, sliding along the windows toward the door. I watched in horror as the door handle began to turn, even though I'd locked it after the last customer had left hours ago. I finally found my voice. There's someone trying to break into the quick stop on Highway 50, mile marker 89. Please send someone now. The door swung open. She stood in the doorway, the cold desert wind blowing her hair around her shoulders. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she took a step inside and another and another. Each footstep left a wet print on the linoleum floor, dark and spreading. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from behind the counter and sprayed it directly at her. The white foam engulfed her and she stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I jumped over the counter and ran out the back exit into the parking lot and didn't stop running until I reached the highway. I flagged down a passing truck driver who let me use his CB radio to contact the police again. 2 patrol cars arrived within 20 minutes. They searched the entire store and found nothing. No woman, no wet footprints, nothing. But when they checked the security footage, they went quiet. The cameras had captured everything. They showed me entering the cooler, standing there for about 15 seconds and then running out, alone. No woman in the cooler. No woman at the windows. No woman entering through the front door. On the footage, I was just spraying a fire extinguisher at empty air. But here's the thing that made the officers exchange worried glances. The front door. The footage clearly showed the door unlocking and opening by itself. No one touched it. Just opened. And those wet footprints I saw, they showed up on camera too. Appearing out of nowhere, tracking across the floor in a path that led from the cooler to where I'd been standing. The police wrote it up as a possible break-in, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. One of the older officers pulled me aside before they left. "Son," he said, "this isn't the first strange report we've gotten about this stretch of highway. If I were you, I'd find employment elsewhere." I quit that night. Didn't even go back for my last paycheck. The owner had to mail it to me. About a week later, I was curious enough to do some research on the area. Turns out, 30 years ago, there was a psychiatric hospital about 5 miles from where the store stood. It burned down in 1993 and several patients died in the fire. One of them was a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who'd been committed after she attacked someone with her bare hands and had to be restrained. The report said she'd suffered severe facial trauma in the fire. I don't know if what I saw was Sarah Mitchell's ghost or something else entirely. All I know is that I'll never work another night shift again. And sometimes late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking on my bedroom window. But I'm on the 3rd floor. Story 2. The Hospital Custodian. My name is Jennifer, and I need to tell you about the worst night of my life. I worked as a custodian at County General Hospital in Oregon for 3 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and I actually found it kind of peaceful. Working the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. meant the hospital was quieter, fewer people around, and I could just put in my earbuds and zone out while I cleaned. The hospital was old, built in the 1960s, and had that institutional feel you'd expect. Long corridors with pale green walls, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, and that distinct hospital smell that's a mix of disinfectant and something else you can't quite identify. My territory was the 4th floor, which housed the pediatric wing and some administrative offices that stayed locked at night. There was a room on the 4th floor that gave everyone the creeps. Room 437. It was at the end of the east corridor and it was always kept locked. Not just regular locked, but padlocked from the outside with a chain. I'd asked my supervisor about it once during training. "That room's been out of commission for years," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Asbestos issues. Just clean around it, don't worry about what's inside." But the thing is, I peeked through the small window in the door sometimes, and the room looked perfectly normal. Just an empty hospital room with a bed, monitors, the usual equipment. Nothing that screamed, asbestos hazard. And why would a room with asbestos issues need to be padlocked from the outside? The other custodians had stories about that room. Carlos swore he'd heard crying coming from inside one night. Debbie claimed she saw the doorknob turning from the inside, even though no one could possibly be in there. I chalked it up to hospital legends. Every old building has them, right? Then came February 14th, Valentine's Day. I remember because the nurses had put up decorations, little paper hearts and cupids everywhere. I was working alone that night as usual, starting my shift on the 4th floor around 11:30 p.m. Everything was normal at first. I cleaned the patient rooms that were vacant, mopped the hallways, emptied trash bins. Around 1 a.m., I was working my way down the east corridor, getting closer to room 437. That's when I noticed something strange. The padlock was gone. The chain lay on the floor in a heap like someone had just removed it and dropped it there. The door to room 437 was slightly open, maybe an inch or two, just enough to see darkness beyond. I should have called security right then. That's what any sensible person would do. But you know what? After 3 years of hearing stories about this room, I was curious. Part of me wanted to know what was inside that was so terrible it needed to be chained shut. I pushed the door open wider and flipped on the light switch. The room looked exactly like any other patient room, except it was completely empty. No bed, no equipment, nothing. Just bare walls and a floor with an old linoleum pattern. But there was something written on the far wall, scratched into the paint in uneven letters. "She's still here." Below the words was a drawing, crude but unmistakable. The outline of a small handprint repeated over and over, covering the entire lower half of the wall. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. All child-sized. A cold feeling washed over me. I backed out of the room, ready to close the door and call my supervisor when I heard it. A sound coming from inside the room, even though I could clearly see it was empty. Giggling. A child's laughter, high-pitched and echoing. The door slammed shut in front of me with such force that I stumbled backward. I heard the lock click from the inside. Then the pounding started. Bang, bang, bang. Small fists hammering on the door from the inside, accompanied by that awful giggling that had turned into screaming. Not screaming for help, but screaming in anger. Rage. The kind of sound that makes your blood freeze in your veins. I ran to the nurse's station and grabbed the phone, dialing security with shaking hands. "This is Jennifer in custodial, 4th floor. I need security up here right now. Someone's in room 437. The security guard, Danny, arrived within 5 minutes. By the time he got there, the pounding had stopped. The hallway was completely silent. "Show me," he said, hand on his flashlight. We walked to room 437 together. The door was closed, no chain, no padlock. Danny tried the handle, it was locked. He pulled out his master key and opened it. The room was empty. Completely bare, just like I'd seen it. But the writing on the wall was gone. So were the handprints. It was just a normal, empty room with nothing unusual about it whatsoever. "Jennifer," Danny said slowly, "are you feeling okay? Have you been getting enough sleep?" I insisted on what I'd seen. He checked the room thoroughly, even looked inside the ceiling tiles and made sure the windows were locked. Nothing. We reviewed the security footage together on the monitor at the nurse's station. The camera showed me walking down the hallway, pausing at room 437, and then standing there for about 2 minutes just staring at the closed door. I never went inside. The door never opened. And there was no sound. The footage had audio and it picked up my breathing, my footsteps, but no giggling, no pounding, nothing. "Look," Danny said not unkindly, "night shifts can mess with your head. Maybe you should take a break, get some water." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? The evidence was right there on the screen. According to the camera, nothing had happened. Danny left and I was alone again. I decided to take his advice and take a break. I went down to the cafeteria on the first floor to clear my head and get some coffee. The cafeteria was closed, but there was a vending machine area that was always open. I was sitting there, sipping terrible coffee from a paper cup, trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything, when a nurse I'd never seen before sat down across from me. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her scrubs hanging loose on her frame. She must have been in her 60s, maybe older. "You saw her, didn't you?" the nurse said without preamble. "Saw who?" "The girl in room 437. Emma." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "How did you?" "I worked here when it happened," she continued, her voice flat and tired. 1987. Emma Chin was 7 years old, brought in with pneumonia. Routine case, should have been fine. But something went wrong with her floor. She had a reaction to one of the medications, went into cardiac arrest. We tried everything, but she trailed off, staring at nothing. She died. The nurse nodded. "In room 437. And ever since then that room has been troubled. Patients refused to stay there. They'd call the nurses, saying a little girl was staring at them from the corner, or they'd feel small hands pulling at their blankets. One man had a heart attack from the fear. After that, the hospital administration decided to keep the room locked. But why the padlock? Why chain it?" The old nurse's eyes met mine, and what I saw there made me deeply uncomfortable. Because the regular lock wasn't enough. She learned how to open it from the inside. I felt my skin prickle. "That's impossible. Ghosts can't." "Can't what?" "Manipulate physical objects? Move things around?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "You were up there tonight. You tell me what ghosts can and can't do." She stood up, preparing to leave. "Wait," I called after her. "What happened to the padlock tonight? Why was it gone?" The nurse turned back and her expression was grim. "Emma doesn't like being locked in. Every few years the lock disappears. The chain falls off, and she gets out for a little while. Usually it's just for one night. But sometimes..." "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes she finds someone she wants to play with, and then that person starts seeing her everywhere. At work, at home, in their dreams." She paused at the doorway. "You seem like a nice girl. My advice? Quit tonight. Don't even finish your shift. Because if Emma has chosen you, the only way to get away from her is to leave this place and never come back." Then she was gone, disappearing around the corner before I could ask her name. I sat there for a long time trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, just hospital legends being perpetuated by a superstitious old nurse. But I couldn't shake the feeling of those small fists pounding on the door, that terrible giggling. I decided to finish my shift. I needed the money and I only had about 5 more hours to go. How bad could it be? I should have listened to the nurse. When I returned to the 4th floor, something was immediately wrong. All the lights in the east corridor were off. Not just turned off, but dead, no power at all. The corridor stretched ahead of me like a tunnel, pitch black except for the emergency exit sign at the far end, casting everything in a dim red glow. I got out my flashlight and started walking. I needed to get to the supply closet to grab replacement bulbs. As I walked, I heard it again. That giggling, echoing off the walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then I saw her. A little girl stood at the end of the corridor, silhouetted against the red exit sign. She wore a hospital gown, and her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders. She was just standing there, not moving. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and scared even to my own ears. The girl tilted her head to one side like a curious puppy. Then she smiled. Even from that distance, I could see her smile was too wide. Impossibly wide. Stretching across her face in a way that human mouths simply don't move. She took a step toward me. Then another. Each step was accompanied by a sound, a wet, slapping sound like bare feet on water. But the floor was dry. I backed up, my flashlight beam shaking as my hands trembled. "Stay back. I'm warning you." She giggled again, that high-pitched sound that made my teeth ache. And then she ran. Not toward me, but along the wall. Literally along the wall, her body perpendicular to the floor, defying gravity as she scuttled like an insect. Her movements were jerky and unnatural, her limbs bending at wrong angles. I screamed and ran in the opposite direction toward the stairwell. Behind me, I could hear her following, that wet slapping sound getting closer and closer. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. She was running on the ceiling now, her hair hanging down, her head twisted around to face me, that horrible smile never wavering. She was fast, impossibly fast, closing the distance between us. I burst through the stairwell door and practically fell down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I could hear her behind me, her giggling echoing in the concrete stairwell, mixing with the sound of my own panicked breathing. I hit the ground floor and ran for the main entrance. The security desk was empty. Where the hell was Danny? I didn't stop to find out. I slammed through the front doors and ran to my car in the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I managed to unlock the door. I jumped in, started the engine, and peeled out of that parking lot like the devil himself was chasing me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw her standing at the hospital entrance, watching me leave. Just standing there, head tilted, smiling that awful smile. I drove straight to my apartment, packed a bag, and drove to my sister's house 3 hours away. I called the hospital the next morning to quit. They said they understood and would mail my final paycheck. I never went back. Not to collect my paycheck, not to get my belongings from my locker, nothing. I cut all ties with that place and never looked back. That was 8 years ago. I've moved twice since then, changed my phone number, even changed my name. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that I'm safe now. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up with the feeling that someone is watching me. And when I open my eyes, I see a shadow in the corner of my room. A small shadow, child-sized, with a head tilted at a curious angle. And I hear the giggling. She found someone to play with, just like the old nurse said. And I'm starting to realize that Emma doesn't like it when the game ends. I'm writing this story because I need people to know. If you ever work at County General Hospital in Oregon, stay away from room 437. And if you hear a child's laughter echoing through empty corridors, run. Run and don't look back. Because once Emma decides she wants to play with you, the game never truly ends. Story 3, The Security Guard. My name is David, and I was a security guard for almost 10 years before the incident that made me change careers entirely. I've worked in malls, office buildings, gated communities, you name it. But the job that broke me was a 6-month contract at an abandoned factory in upstate New York. The factory had been closed since the early 2000s, a casualty of outsourcing and economic downturns. But the property was huge, over 200,000 square feet of manufacturing space, warehouses and office buildings, and the owner wanted security while he negotiated a sale to a developer. That's where I came in. The job paid well, really well. Almost twice what I'd made at my previous position. The catch: I had to work alone, 5 nights a week from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The owner, a businessman named Richard Strauss, told me it was just to prevent vandalism and theft. He'd had problems with local kids breaking in and copper thieves stripping the wiring. Just do your rounds, check all the entry points, and call the police if you see anyone, he'd said during my interview. Easy money. I should have known nothing paying that well would be easy. The factory was located about 2 miles outside of town, surrounded by woods on 3 sides and a crumbling parking lot on the 4th. The main building was a 3-story brick structure with dozens of broken windows and graffiti covering the lower levels. Behind it were 2 warehouse buildings and a smaller administrative building. My first night, I arrived right at 10 p.m. with my flashlight, radio, and the set of keys Richard had given me. The place looked even more depressing at night, lit only by a few security lights mounted on poles around the perimeter. Most of them were broken or had burned out years ago. I started with the main building. The front entrance was chained shut, so I went around to the side door, which was designated as my entry point. The door groaned as I pushed it open, and I was hit immediately with the smell of decay and mildew. The interior was a mess. Overturned equipment, papers scattered everywhere, broken glass crunching under my boots. I did my rounds that first night without incident, checking all the doors and windows, sweeping my flashlight through empty rooms that had once been full of workers but now housed only darkness and the sound of water dripping from leaky pipes. Around 2 a.m., I was on the third floor of the main building when I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. Machinery. Somewhere in the building, machinery was running. I could hear the rhythmic clanking and whirring of industrial equipment echoing through the empty corridors. But that was impossible. The factory had no power. The electricity had been shut off years ago. I stood there, listening, trying to pinpoint the location of the sound. It seemed to be coming from below me, maybe the first floor. I headed back down, my hand on the radio, ready to call the police if I found evidence of someone breaking in. By the time I reached the first floor, the sound had stopped. The building was silent again except for the wind whistling through broken windows and the occasional creak of settling wood and metal. I searched the entire first floor and found nothing. No people, no equipment running, no explanation for what I'd heard. I convinced myself it was just the old building settling, pipes expanding and contracting, that sort of thing. Old factories make noise. I know that. But when I was walking back to the stairwell, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the wall, partially hidden behind an overturned filing cabinet, was graffiti. Not the usual tagged names or crude drawings you'd expect from bored teenagers. It was a message written in what looked like spray paint. They never left. Below it was a date, November 7, 2003. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what had happened on that date, but something about the message bothered me. I took a photo with my phone and made a mental note to research it when I got home. The rest of that first week was quiet. Too quiet. I'd walk through those empty buildings for 8 hours a night, seeing nothing, hearing nothing except the usual sounds of abandonment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck when someone's staring at you? I had that constantly. On my day off, I did some digging into the factory's history. It had been a textile mill originally, built in 1947, before transitioning to manufacturing automotive parts in the 1980s. It had employed over 500 people at its peak. Then I found the article. On November 7, 2003, there had been an accident at the factory. A catastrophic failure in one of the main production lines. The article wasn't specific about what went wrong, but it mentioned that 7 workers had been killed and several more injured. The factory closed its doors 3 weeks later, citing financial difficulties and safety concerns. 7 workers dead. And no one had bothered to mention this to me. I called Richard the next day to ask about it. "Oh, that," he said, his tone dismissive. "Yes, tragic business. But it was over 20 years ago, David. Nothing to worry about now. The factory's been vacant all this time. Did you think that might be relevant information before you hired me to work there alone at night?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Are you worried about ghosts, David? I thought you were a professional." I almost quit right there. But the money was too good and I'd signed a contract. I decided to stick it out. I wish I hadn't. Things escalated on my second week. I was doing my rounds on the 3rd floor when I heard voices. Not machinery this time, but actual human voices having a conversation somewhere in the building. I froze listening. The voices were muffled, like they were coming from behind a wall or from another floor. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear the rise and fall of speech, the rhythm of people talking back and forth. I grabbed my radio. "This is David at the factory. I've got possible intruders in the main building. Requesting police assistance." The dispatcher said they'd send a unit, estimated arrival time 15 minutes. I decided to investigate while I waited. I followed the sound of the voices, and they led me to a section of the 3rd floor I hadn't paid much attention to before, what looked like it had been supervisors' offices. The voices were coming from behind a closed door at the end of a hallway. I could hear them clearly now. Multiple voices, men and women, talking and laughing like they were having a normal conversation at work. Told him it wasn't safe, but he wouldn't listen. "Just a few more hours and we can go home." "Did you hear about Patterson's wife? She had the baby?" Normal, mundane workplace conversation. Except there was no one there. The factory was empty. I was alone. I put my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The room was empty. Just an abandoned office with a desk, some overturned chairs, and papers scattered everywhere. But the moment I stepped inside, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it was oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly I became aware of another sound. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing like someone who'd been running hard. It was coming from the closet in the corner of the office. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, to run out of that building and never come back. But I was being paid to investigate and backup was on the way. I walked to the closet, flashlight raised, and opened the door. Nothing. Just empty space and some old coat hangers. But the breathing continued, right in front of me, like someone invisible was standing there, inches from my face. I backed out of the room quickly and waited in the hallway for the police to arrive. When they did, we searched the entire building together. They found no evidence of intruders, no explanation for the voices I'd heard. Old buildings make weird sounds, one of the officers said. Probably just acoustics, wind blowing through gaps, that kind of thing. I didn't argue. What could I say? That I'd heard ghost voices having a conversation about coworker gossip from 20 years ago? The officers left and I was alone again. I seriously considered walking off the job right then. But I had rent to pay, bills to cover. I needed this money. So I decided to tough it out and just avoid the third floor as much as possible. That strategy worked for about 3 more nights. On Friday of my 3rd week, I was doing a routine check of the warehouse buildings when my flashlight died. Completely dead, even though I'd put fresh batteries in at the start of my shift. I had a backup flashlight in my car, so I headed back across the parking lot to get it. The parking lot was dark. Most of the light poles were broken, but there was enough moonlight to see by. I was about halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. The parking lot was empty. No one there. I kept walking. The footsteps continued, matching my pace. When I walked faster, they walked faster. When I stopped, they stopped. I spun around, heart pounding. Who's there? This is private property. No answer. Just silence and the wind rustling through the trees at the edge of the parking lot. I turned back toward my car and that's when I saw them. 7 figures stood between me and my vehicle. They were dark, silhouetted against the faint light pollution from the distant town, but I could make out their shapes. 7 people standing perfectly still, watching me. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative even though my voice was shaking. "You're trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there. I pulled out my phone to call 911 and when I looked up again they had moved closer. Not walked, moved. They were suddenly 10 feet closer than they'd been a second ago, though I hadn't seen them take a single step. Panic set in. I ran. Not toward my car, they were blocking that route, but toward the administrative building. I figured I could lock myself inside and call for help. Behind me I heard footsteps. Many footsteps. Running. I burst through the door of the administrative building and slammed it behind me, fumbling for the lock. Through the small window in the door I could see them coming. 7 figures, running across the parking lot in perfect synchronization, their movements identical, like a video being played 7 times at once. They reached the door. I backed away, deeper into the building as they pressed against the glass, their faces coming into the light for the first time. I will never forget what I saw. They had faces, but they were all wrong. Burns. Terrible, disfiguring burns that had melted their features into something barely recognizable as human. Skin that looked like melted wax, eyes that were just empty sockets, mouths open in silent screams. They began pounding on the door. The glass cracked, then shattered. I ran deeper into the building, through corridors I'd walked 100 times before but now seemed like a maze. Behind me I could hear them coming. Not just footsteps now, but voices. Those same workplace conversations I'd heard before, but overlapping, echoing, building into a cacophony of sound that made my head pound. I found a small office and barricaded myself inside, pushing a desk against the door. I called 911 again, gasping out my location, begging them to send help immediately. "Sir, please calm down. What's your emergency?" "There are people, things, chasing me at the factory on Route 17. Please, I need help now." The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, her calm voice trying to keep me from completely losing it. I could hear the things outside the door moving around, searching. Their voices rose and fell, having conversations that made no sense. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We can't leave, we can't leave, we can't leave. Make him see what we saw. Join us, join us, join us. Then they found me. The door began to shake as they threw themselves against it. The desk I'd pushed against it started to slide backward with each impact. I looked around desperately for another way out, but there was only one small window and it was painted shut. Crash. The door burst open and they poured into the room. I closed my eyes, waiting for whatever was going to happen. But then, sir, police, hands where we can see them. I opened my eyes. The room was full of police officers, their flashlights sweeping the space. The 7 figures were gone. I was alone in the office, curled in a corner, shaking uncontrollably. They escorted me out of the building. In the parking lot, there were 3 patrol cars, their lights flashing blue and red across the empty factory. The officers questioned me extensively. Had I taken any substances? Was I on any medication? Had I been drinking? I told them everything I'd seen. They listened patiently, then exchanged glances that clearly said they thought I'd had some kind of mental breakdown. Mr. Harrison, one of the senior officers, said, "We searched the entire property. There's no one here but you. No evidence of intruders, no signs of break-ins. But I saw them. 7 people with burned faces. Sir, we're going to recommend you seek medical attention. You might be experiencing exhaustion or..." "I'm not crazy," I shouted. "Something happened here. Something terrible. And it's still here, it never left." The officer's expression softened. "Mr. Harrison, we know about the accident in 2003. 7 workers died when there was a boiler explosion in the main building. It was a tragedy. But that was over 20 years ago. There's nothing here now but an empty factory. Boiler explosion. 7 dead." The pieces clicked into place in my mind. "Where did they die?" I asked quietly. "Where in the building?" The officer hesitated. "The boiler room was in the basement of the administrative building." "Why?" "The building I'd just been in. The building where I'd been cornered. I quit that night. Didn't even wait until morning. I called Richard from the police station and told him I was done, contract or no contract. He threatened to sue me for breach of contract, but I didn't care. No amount of money was worth going back to that place. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. About a month after I quit, I was talking to a friend who works in commercial real estate. I mentioned the factory and he got this strange look on his face. "David, that property hasn't been for sale. The owner, Richard Strauss, he's hired and fired over 30 security guards in the past 10 years. None of them last more than a few months. Some of them lasted only a few nights." "What?" "But he told me. He tells everyone the same story. That he's selling it, that he needs security. But the truth is, after those 7 workers died, their families sued. The case was settled out of court, but part of the settlement required Strauss to maintain a continuous security presence on the property. Something about liability and proving the property was being monitored." I felt cold. "So he's just been cycling through guards? Sending people in there alone, knowing what's in there?" My friend nodded. "I've heard rumors. Stories from some of the other guards who worked there. They all experienced similar things. Voices, footsteps, apparitions. One guy claimed he saw a full-scale reenactment of the accident, like watching a movie playing out in front of him." I did more research after that conversation. I found 3 other security guards who'd worked at the factory and were willing to talk. Their stories were eerily similar to mine. One had seen the 7 burned figures. Another had heard machinery running in a building with no power. A third had been chased through the warehouse by something he couldn't quite see but could definitely hear. And the dates. Each of us had experienced the worst of our encounters on Friday nights. I checked the records. The boiler explosion had happened on a Friday. November 7th, 2003. A Friday. Those 7 workers had died violently, unexpectedly, in the middle of their shift. And somehow they were still there, trapped in an endless loop, reliving their last moments over and over. Or maybe, after 20 years of being alone in that abandoned factory, they just wanted company. I moved to a different state 6 months later. I had to. I couldn't stand the thought of being anywhere near that place. I changed careers too. I work in IT now, a nice safe office job with normal daytime hours. But sometimes in my nightmares, I'm back in that factory, walking through empty corridors with only my flashlight for company. And behind me, always behind me, I hear them coming. 7 pairs of footsteps, moving in perfect synchronization. 7 voices whispering in the darkness, "Join us, join us, join us." And I wake up, drenched in sweat, with the absolute certainty that one night, I won't wake up at all. One night, I'll find myself back in that factory, and this time I won't be able to leave. Because they're patient. They've waited this long. And they've decided that I'm the one they want. I don't know what I did to deserve being chosen. Maybe I stayed longer than the others. Maybe I heard too much, saw too much. Or maybe it's random and I'm just unlucky. All I know is that I check my locks 3 times before bed every night. I sleep with the lights on. And I've made my girlfriend promise that if I ever start talking about going back to that factory, for any reason, she should call the police and have me committed. Because part of me wants to go back. A small, dark part of my brain that whispers that I left something unfinished there. That I need to return. That they're waiting for me. And that's the truly terrifying part. Not the ghosts or the apparitions or the impossible things I saw. It's the fact that whatever is in that factory has gotten into my head. And I don't think it's ever going to leave. If you're a security guard and someone offers you a job at an abandoned factory in upstate New York, don't take it. I don't care how much they're paying. It's not worth it. Because some places are abandoned for a reason. And sometimes the dead don't stay dead. They just wait in the darkness, hoping someone will join them. I know this. I've learned this the hard way. And now you know it too. Closing. Those were 3 true stories from people who learned that working the night shift can show you things the daylight hides. Things that perhaps should stay hidden. Marcus still hears tapping on his window, 3 floors up. Jennifer sees a shadow in her bedroom corner. And David feels the pull of that abandoned factory, calling him back to finish what was started. If you work nights, stay vigilant. Not everything that walks in darkness is human. And not everything you encounter will let you go when morning comes. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever worked a night shift? Have you experienced something that you couldn't explain? Something that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up and your blood run cold? Share your stories in the comments below. The best ones might be featured in a future video. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure you're subscribed to Dark Whispers and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We bring you the darkest, most terrifying true stories every week. And if you really want to support the channel and hear even more exclusive content, check out our Patreon link in the description below. Share this video with someone brave enough to watch it, or better yet, someone who works the night shift. They need to know what might be waiting for them in the darkness. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, when you're alone at night, you're never truly alone. This has been Dark Whispers. Good night, and good luck.